I never thought a 14-year-old girl could vanish into thin air until I started digging into what happened in Manchester, New Hampshire, on April 27, 1980. What I discovered will make you question everything you think you know about missing persons cases, because this isn't just another runaway story. This is something that defies every logical explanation, and the evidence will leave you staring at your ceiling at 3:45 a.m. wondering if someone's about to call you too. You know that feeling when you're walking through your neighborhood at night and something just feels off? That's Manchester, New Hampshire in April 1980. The snow had finally melted, revealing the gritty reality of another harsh New England winter. I can smell that distinct Manchester air even now, a mix of mill smoke, wet concrete, and that particular scent of old apartment buildings that have seen too much history. Laureen Ann Rahn was born right here on April 3, 1966, just a few weeks before what would become the most disturbing night of her mother's life. Now, Laureen wasn't your typical small-town New Hampshire girl. Her parents divorced when she was still crawling around in diapers, and her father might as well have been a ghost for all the contact he had with her. When Laureen turned 4, her mother Judith packed up their entire life and headed south to Miami, Florida, chasing that American dream of sunshine and fresh starts. Picture this: a young mother from the Granite State suddenly thrust into the humid, palm tree paradise of 1970s Miami. The culture shock alone must have been overwhelming. But here's the thing about dreams: they don't always pan out the way you expect. After years of struggling to make it work in Florida's unforgiving heat and social scene, Judith found herself packing up again in 1976, dragging 10-year-old Laureen back north to the familiar, cold embrace of Manchester. By 1980, they were living in a third-floor apartment, and Laureen was attending junior high just a few blocks away. From her bedroom window, she could see the Merrimack River cutting through the city like a silver ribbon, carrying away secrets and dreams in equal measure. Laureen was what we'd call a free spirit, the kind of kid who'd belt out songs in the school hallway and talk about running away to become the next big actress. She had that infectious energy that small New Hampshire towns either nurture or crush completely. But underneath that dreamer exterior, she was doing what a lot of kids her age were doing in 1980s Manchester, experimenting with alcohol and cigarettes, testing boundaries when Mom wasn't looking. The kind of rebellion that makes parents' hearts race but seems harmless enough in hindsight. Spring of 1980 brought something new into Judith's life. A professional tennis player who swept her off her feet with promises of weekend getaways and matches in neighboring towns. Saturday, April 26th, was supposed to be just another one of those romantic weekends. Laureen usually tagged along on these trips, but this time she begged to stay home alone. Picture a 13-year-old girl, just weeks away from her 14th birthday, pleading for independence in that way only teenagers can. "Mom, I'm practically an adult," she probably said, using that universal teenage logic that somehow makes perfect sense to them and none to us. Judith hesitated, any mother would, but eventually gave in. After all, it was just one night, and she'd be back early Sunday morning, April 27th. Just 12 hours of freedom for a girl who was practically bursting with the need to spread her wings. If this has happened to you as a parent, drop "happened" in the comments, because what came next would haunt Judith for the rest of her life. After Judith left that Saturday, Laureen settled into what seemed like a perfectly normal day for a teenager home alone. She tackled some chores, probably the bare minimum to avoid getting in trouble, watched TV, and spent hours on the phone with friends. You know how it is when you're that age and you have the house to yourself. Everything feels more exciting, more adult. Several family members stopped by to check on her throughout the day, and she seemed fine, happy even. That afternoon, she walked to a nearby liquor store where she'd occasionally help stock shelves in exchange for free drinks. This wasn't unusual. It was 1980s New Hampshire, and 14-year-olds doing odd jobs for local businesses was as common as snow in February. When she returned to the apartment, she had a bottle of wine and a six-pack of beer. The kind of contraband that makes teenagers feel invincible and parents lose sleep for good reason. But that wasn't even the strangest part of what was about to unfold. Shortly after returning home, Laureen made 2 phone calls that would change everything. She called a male friend and a female friend, inviting them over to drink and listen to music. "My mom's out of town," she told them. "We'll have the place to ourselves." Those words, innocent enough at the time, would later echo in investigators' minds like a death knell. The 3 friends spent the next several hours doing what teenagers have done since the dawn of time: talking, laughing, and listening to music while pushing the boundaries of what they were allowed to do. At exactly 12:30 a.m. on April 27th, they heard loud voices echoing through the hallway outside. In that instant, teenage panic set in. They all assumed it was Judith coming home early, and having a boy over late at night was definitely going to mean trouble. The kind of trouble that gets you grounded until graduation. The male friend either panicked on his own or Laureen told him to leave. Either way, he bolted out the back door like his life depended on it. Here's where the first truly strange detail emerges. As he left, he distinctly heard the door lock behind him. That clicking sound of a deadbolt sliding into place. Remember that detail, because it's going to become crucial to understanding just how impossible this case really is. But here's the twist that makes your blood run cold. It wasn't Judith in the hallway after all. Whatever those voices were, whoever was making that noise, it was just a false alarm. The male friend was long gone by the time Laureen and her female friend realized they'd panicked over nothing. Can you imagine the relief flooding through that apartment? The nervous laughter, the "oh my God, we thought you were my mom" moment that teenagers know all too well. Judith and her tennis player boyfriend would arrive about 45 minutes later, around 1:15 a.m., expecting to find their daughter safely asleep in her bed. Instead, they walked into something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about their quiet Manchester neighborhood, their secure building, and the very nature of how people can simply cease to exist. The first thing that hit them was the darkness. Not just the apartment. The entire hallway was pitch black. Every single floor of the 3-story building was shrouded in an unnatural darkness that immediately set off every parental alarm bell Judith possessed. At first, they thought the power was out, but a closer inspection revealed something far more sinister. Someone had methodically unscrewed every single light bulb in the building's hallways. Think about that for a moment. Someone had taken the time to walk through every floor of this apartment building, systematically removing each light bulb. This wasn't vandalism. This was preparation. This was someone who needed darkness, who needed to move unseen through a building they knew would normally be well lit. The precision of it, the thoroughness, suggests someone who had been planning this moment carefully. When they reached the apartment door, Judith's heart nearly stopped. It was unlocked. Not just unlocked, standing slightly ajar, like an invitation into a nightmare. Her boyfriend immediately moved toward the back of the apartment, while Judith rushed to Laureen's bedroom, her mother's instinct screaming that something was terribly wrong. From the doorway, she could see a dark figure in Laureen's bed, and for one blessed moment, relief washed over her. But that relief lasted exactly as long as it took her boyfriend to call out from the back of the apartment. The back door's open too. The smell hit her next. That distinct, sharp scent of alcohol mixed with something else. Fear, maybe, or the residue of teenage anxiety. As she moved closer to the bed, Judith realized the figure under the covers wasn't her daughter at all. It was Laureen's female friend, apparently sleeping off whatever they'd been drinking earlier that evening. When gently shaken awake, the friend delivered the words that would echo in Judith's nightmares for decades. Laureen took a pillow and blanket and went to sleep on the living room couch around 12:30 or 1 a.m. The friend was still intoxicated, her words slurred with alcohol and sleep, but her message was crystal clear. Laureen had been there when she fell asleep, but something had happened after that. Judith ran to the living room, her heart pounding against her ribs like a caged bird. The couch was empty. No pillow, no blanket, No trace that anyone had ever intended to sleep there. But there, on the floor next to the couch, were Laureen's purse and her new shoes, the ones she'd been so excited about, the ones she never went anywhere without. If you think that's strange, wait until you hear what happened next, because this is where the case goes from mysterious to absolutely impossible. The friend, still groggy but trying to help, described what Laureen had been wearing: jeans, a blue plaid blouse, and a light-colored V-neck sweater. Those clothes were gone, presumably still on Laureen wherever she was. But here's what doesn't make sense. If she was planning to leave, why would she take the time to grab her clothes but leave behind her purse and shoes? What 14-year-old girl leaves the house barefoot in April in New Hampshire, especially at night when temperatures can still drop below freezing? Judith's boyfriend did his best to remain calm, suggesting they start calling friends and family members. Maybe Laureen had gone to someone's house. Maybe she'd had a fight with her friend and decided to walk to a relative's place. The phone calls began immediately, each ring carrying hope and each "no, we haven't seen her" response driving them deeper into panic. By 2 a.m. they were in the car, driving through the empty streets of Manchester, checking every park, every corner, every place a teenage girl might go in the middle of the night. The city looked different at that hour, more menacing, full of shadows that could hide anything or anyone. Every shape in the darkness could have been Laureen, but none of them were. At 4 a.m., with no other options left, Judith flagged down a police officer. Her voice was probably shaking as she explained that her daughter had vanished from a locked apartment, leaving behind only questions and a trail of impossibilities. The officer took one look at this frantic mother and called for backup immediately. Within the hour, Manchester police officers were searching every corner of the city they could think of. They interviewed dozens of friends, family members, and neighbors. They quickly cleared the two friends who had been with Laureen that night. Both had solid alibis and no motive to harm her. But after hours of interviews, only one consistent detail emerged. Laureen regularly told her friends that she wanted to run away and become an actress. To the authorities, this seemed like the obvious answer. Teenage girl talks about running away. Teenage girl disappears. Case closed. They visited local businesses, hoping someone had seen Laureen, but came up empty-handed. Then, just when it seemed like they'd hit a dead end, a bus company employee came forward with information that would either solve the case or make it infinitely more complex. The employee claimed he had sold a ticket to a girl who looked exactly like Laureen on the day she disappeared. One of the company's drivers even insisted she was on his bus and that she'd gotten off at the terminal in Boston, about 50 miles south of Manchester. Boston, the big city where a small-town New Hampshire girl could disappear into the urban maze and reinvent herself as the actress she'd always dreamed of becoming. For a few weeks, this felt like the breakthrough everyone had been waiting for. But when investigators showed the bus driver a more recent photograph of Laureen, his confidence wavered. It might have been another young woman who just looked like her, he admitted, and just like that, the most promising lead in the case evaporated like morning fog over the Merrimack River. In the absence of any evidence of foul play, the authorities reached their official conclusion. Laureen Ann Rahn had finally made good on her promise to run away. They assured Judith that most runaways return within a week or two, when the reality of life on the streets proves less glamorous than they'd imagined. But Judith knew better. She knew her daughter in ways that investigators and bus drivers never could. Laureen wouldn't have left without her purse, her money, her identification. She wouldn't have left barefoot in April. Most importantly, she wouldn't have left without saying goodbye, without some way to let her mother know she was okay. They were too close for that kind of cold departure. And then, 5 months later, something happened that would turn this missing person case into something far more sinister. October 1st, 1980. Judith was going through her phone bill when she noticed charges for 3 calls she'd never made. Calls to hotels in Santa Ana and Santa Monica, California. She'd never been to California, had no friends or family there, no business connections on the West Coast. The only logical explanation was that Laureen had somehow gotten to California and was using hotel phones to call. Who? The call from Santa Ana was the most disturbing. After some digging, Judith discovered it had been made to a sexual assistance hotline for abused and exploited teens, many of them runaways who had fallen into the worst kinds of situations imaginable. The kind of situations that keep parents awake at night, staring at the ceiling and imagining horrors they can't bear to think about. Judith immediately forwarded this information to the authorities. A detective contacted the doctor who operated the hotline, but he denied knowing anything about the call or having any record of it. His response was strangely evasive, almost defensive, as if he were hiding something he didn't want law enforcement to discover. But that wasn't even the strangest part. Around this same time, Judith began receiving phone calls that would continue for years, calls that would make her question her sanity and wonder if her daughter was trying to communicate from wherever she'd ended up. The calls always came at approximately 3:45 a.m. Always. Judith would jolt awake to the sound of the phone ringing, her heart racing as she grabbed the receiver and whispered, "Hello," into the darkness. But the caller never spoke. Just silence, sometimes the sound of breathing, and then the line would go dead. At first, Judith was certain it was Laureen. The timing seemed too specific to be coincidence, and the frequency increased during holiday seasons, times when a homesick runaway might be most likely to reach out to the family she'd left behind. But as months turned into years, those 3:45 a.m. calls became a form of psychological torture, a constant reminder that somewhere out there, someone knew something about what had happened to her daughter. Laureen's aunt also reported receiving strange calls from a young woman who sounded like her niece. The caller would ask to speak to Mike, Laureen's childhood nickname for her cousin Michael. It was a detail so specific, so intimate, that it couldn't have been coincidence. But like all the other leads in this case, it led nowhere concrete. Years later, Judith would be forced to change her phone number, and the 3:45 a.m. calls stopped immediately. Whoever had been calling knew her number, but couldn't track down the new one. This suggested someone with limited resources or connections, not the kind of sophisticated operation you might expect if this were an organized crime situation. In 1985, an investigator with Wings for Children decided to recontact the doctor who ran the California hotline. This time, his story changed slightly. He admitted that runaways and exploited teens occasionally visited the home he shared with his wife, and he even acknowledged that one of them might have been from New Hampshire. Why had he changed his story? What had he been hiding 5 years earlier? The investigators' follow-up visit to the motels in Santa Ana and Santa Monica revealed another disturbing detail. One of the motels had allegedly been used as a filming location by an infamous videographer of minors known only as Dr. Z. The identity of this person was never confirmed, and the connection to Laureen's case remained speculation, but it painted a picture of the kind of underworld that swallows runaway teenagers and spits out broken lives. That same year, back in New Hampshire, Laureen's former childhood sweetheart received a call from a young woman who identified herself as Laurie, Laureen's nickname among close friends. He wasn't home at the time, but his mother took the message, and he was convinced it had to be her. But like every other potential breakthrough in this case, it led to nothing but more questions. And then the case went cold. Not just cold, frozen solid like a New Hampshire winter that never ends. Here's what we know for certain. On the night of April 26th into April 27th, 1980, 14-year-old Laureen Ann Rahn vanished from a locked apartment in Manchester, New Hampshire. Someone had systematically unscrewed every light bulb in her building. She left behind her purse, her shoes, her identification, and her money. She disappeared during a window of perhaps 30 minutes, between the time her male friend left through the back door and when her mother arrived home. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of forced entry, no indication that she had planned to leave. Yet somehow, she walked out of that apartment barefoot in April and was never seen again. The phone calls, the California hotel charges, the mysterious hotline connection. All of it suggests that Laureen ended up far from Manchester, possibly caught up in something much darker than a simple runaway situation. But what happened in that apartment? How does a 14-year-old girl disappear from a locked building without leaving a trace? Why would someone go to the trouble of unscrewing light bulbs throughout the entire building? And who was making those 3:45 a.m. phone calls for years afterward? If you've experienced anything similar, or if you recognize details from this case that might connect to something you know about, drop "recognize" in the comments. Sometimes the smallest detail can break a case that's been cold for decades. The truth is, Laureen and Ron's disappearance represents something that challenges our basic understanding of how people vanish. This wasn't a random abduction, but it also wasn't a planned runaway. This was something else entirely. Something that required preparation, inside knowledge of the building, and the ability to move a teenager from Manchester, New Hampshire to California without leaving a trail that investigators could follow. 43 years later, Laureen would be 57 years old if she's still alive. Her mother Judith spent the rest of her life wondering what happened in those crucial minutes when someone turned her daughter into a ghost. The case remains officially unsolved, filed away in some Manchester Police Department cabinet, gathering dust like so many other impossible disappearances. But here's what haunts me most about this case: the precision of it all. The systematically removed light bulbs. The timing that allowed someone to enter and leave the building without being seen. The fact that Laureen's friend was left unharmed and apparently unaware of what was happening. This wasn't random. This was planned by someone who knew the building, knew Laureen's routine, knew exactly when and how to make a 14-year-old girl vanish without a trace. And somewhere out there, someone knows exactly what happened in that Manchester apartment building on April 27, 1980. Someone knows who unscrewed those light bulbs. Someone knows where Laureen and Rahn ended up, and whether those 3:45 a.m. phone calls were really her trying to reach home across an impossible distance, or something far more sinister playing psychological games with a mother's broken heart. The next time your phone rings at 3:45 a.m., remember Laureen and Rahn. Remember that some mysteries are so perfectly constructed that they can swallow a person completely, leaving behind only questions that echo through decades like voices in an empty hallway. And remember that in Manchester, New Hampshire, there's still a mother's love waiting for answers that may never come. If this story has left you with that familiar chill of recognition, hit that subscribe button, because there are more impossible disappearances out there. Cases that will make you question everything you think you know about how people can simply cease to exist. And if you know anything at all, about what happened to Laureen and Rahn, there's still time to bring her story home.